1963, Turkish government orders aerial surveys for a new dam project. Photographs reveal something impossible on a barren hillside. Geometric patterns buried under centuries of dirt. The surveyors file their report. It sits in archives for 30 years. Ignored. 1994. A Kurdish shepherd notices carved stones protruding from the ground. Local villagers had known about them for generations. Called the place Potbelly Hill. Göbekli Tepe. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrives expecting to find a medieval cemetery. Nothing special. What he finds instead makes him stop, stare, then radio for more equipment. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing 20 tons, arranged in perfect circles, covered with intricate carvings of animals that hadn't been seen in the region for thousands of years. He begins excavation. Carbon dating reveals the structure's age, 9600 BCE. That's 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. And here's what made Schmidt realize he'd found something that would rewrite human history. It was built before agriculture. Before humans were supposed to have the organization, the technology, or the motivation to create something like this. Built by hunter-gatherers, people living in small nomadic groups, using stone tools. That shouldn't be possible. The pillars stand up to 18 feet tall, quarried from bedrock 500 meters away. Each one weighs as much as 3 cars. Modern engineers estimate moving one pillar would require at least 500 people. Specialized tools, detailed planning, logistics. But in 9600 BCE, humans were supposed to be scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. No permanent settlements, no social hierarchy, no surplus food to feed non-farming workers. Yet somehow they quarried these massive stones, transported them uphill, erected them with astronomical precision, then carved them with stunning artistic detail. Foxes, gazelles, snakes, lions, scorpions, vultures, and mysterious 8-shaped symbols that appear nowhere else in the archaeological record. To this day, no one knows what they mean. The site covers 22 acres. Ground-penetrating radar reveals at least 20 circular structures still buried. After 25 years of excavation, archaeologists estimate they've uncovered less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe. But here's what disturbs researchers most. Someone deliberately buried it. This wasn't abandoned. It wasn't destroyed by invaders or natural disaster. Around 8000 BCE, the builders filled these circular structures with thousands of tons of dirt and debris. Intentionally, laboriously. The burial actually preserved it. Without exposure to wind and rain, the carving survived in near-perfect condition for 10,000 years. Almost as if whoever buried it wanted it found again, someday. Why would a civilization go to extraordinary effort to hide the most magnificent structure they'd ever created? For over a century, archaeologists taught the same story about human civilization. Humans discovered agriculture around 10,000 BCE. This led to permanent settlements. Settlements led to specialization. Specialization led to cities. Cities led to civilization. Agriculture first, then temples. Göbekli Tepe destroys that entire narrative. This massive temple complex was built before agriculture, which means the traditional story is backwards. Some researchers now believe religion came first, that humanity's desire to gather for spiritual or ceremonial purposes actually led to agriculture. Think about that. Our ancestors didn't build temples because they had civilization. They built civilization because they wanted temples. To construct Göbekli Tepe required hundreds of workers gathering regularly, food supplies to feed them, social organization to coordinate the effort, leadership to direct the project, shared belief system to motivate it. All of this existed 11,600 years ago, before writing, before pottery, before metal tools, before what we call civilization. So who were these people? What did they believe? What happened to them? Klaus Schmidt spent years fighting for funding and recognition. Many archaeologists dismissed his findings as impossible, said he was misinterpreting the evidence, claimed the dating must be wrong, because accepting Göbekli Tepe means accepting that everything in the textbooks is wrong. The site wasn't properly excavated until the 1990s, even though aerial surveys identified it in 1963. 30 years of sitting in archives ignored. Why? Because it didn't fit the narrative. Hunter-gatherers can't build monumental architecture. That's what every anthropology textbook said, so the evidence was set aside, waiting for a theory that could explain it, even after Schmidt proved the dating, after the carvings were documented, after the engineering was analyzed. Mainstream archaeology largely ignored it for over a decade. It took until the 2010s for Göbekli Tepe to enter public consciousness, 15 years after excavation began. Why the delay? Because admitting this site exists means admitting they got human history wrong. If a civilization this sophisticated existed 11,600 years ago, what else existed that we don't know about? What other impossible sites have been dismissed because they don't fit the timeline? Since Göbekli Tepe's discovery, dozens of similar sites have been found across Turkey. Each one challenges accepted history. Each one pushes civilization further back. Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan Tepesi, Bonşuklu Tarla. All of them dated to the same impossible period. All of them showing sophisticated construction. This wasn't one isolated site. This was a civilization. Ground-penetrating radar reveals what's still buried at Göbekli Tepe. At least 20 more circular structures, each potentially containing carvings, symbols, and information we haven't seen yet. 95% of the site remains underground. But excavation has slowed dramatically. Funding is limited. Progress is measured in decades, not years. Some researchers believe this is deliberate, that revealing too much, too fast, would force too many uncomfortable questions. Questions like, who taught these people to build this? Where did the knowledge come from? Where did it go? The civilization that built Göbekli Tepe vanished, left almost no trace except these buried temples. No cities, no writing, no artifacts that survived. Just these massive stone structures, deliberately hidden under tons of earth. Why bury them? What were they protecting? What were they hiding? Some researchers believe the sites contain astronomical knowledge, that the pillar arrangements track celestial events, that ancient people encoded information about cosmic cycles into stone. Others think the burial was a warning, that something happened around 8,000 BCI that made them want to preserve evidence for future generations. But here's what terrifies mainstream archaeology most. If Göbekli Tepe existed 11,600 years ago, what existed 15,000 years ago? 20,000 years ago? How many other impossible sites are buried under sand and dirt, waiting to be found? And how many have already been found and quietly reburied? Göbekli Tepe proves one thing beyond doubt. We don't know our own history. For centuries, we've been taught that civilization is a straight line, primitive to advanced, simple to complex. But what if that's wrong? What if advanced civilizations rose and fell long before recorded history? What if knowledge was gained, lost, and gained again multiple times. What if we're not the first? The evidence is there, buried in Turkey, visible in satellite images, carbon dated and verified. But mainstream archaeology moves slowly, carefully, cautiously, because every revelation at Göbekli Tepe makes the past less certain, makes our understanding of human development less solid, and institutions don't like uncertainty. Klaus Schmidt died in 2014. He spent nearly 20 years excavating Göbekli Tepe. In his final interviews, he said something disturbing. We've barely scratched the surface. What's still buried there will change everything we think we know about human history. But he also said funding was becoming harder to get. Interest from mainstream institutions was declining. The site that should be the most important archaeological project in the world is being slowly forgotten again. Why? Because some truths are too dangerous. They threaten too many established careers, too many published theories, too many textbooks. It's easier to let it stay buried. Göbekli Tepe was built 11,600 years ago by people who weren't supposed to have civilization. They quarried 20-ton stones, transported them uphill, carved them with precision, then buried them deliberately. 95% of the site remains underground, waiting. But Göbekli Tepe isn't the only impossible site being hidden from us. Next episode, we investigate Spain's Atlantis, the underwater city that matches Plato's description perfectly. Satellite imagery reveals it. Archaeological evidence supports it. But mainstream science refuses to call it what it is. What do you think happened 11,600 years ago? Who built Göbekli Tepe? And why did they bury it? Comment your theory. And if you're ready to discover what else they're not teaching us, subscribe to ARKA Prime, because human history is a lie, and we're exposing the truth they buried.